The fluorescent lights of the Save Mart grocery store in Cedar Falls, Iowa, hummed their usual monotonous tune on that cold February afternoon. Sarah Mitchell stood in aisle 7, her worn sneakers squeaking against the linoleum floor as she compared prices on milk cartons. Her 5-year-old daughter Emma tugged at her faded jeans, pointing excitedly at a box of colorful cereal on the top shelf. "Mom, can we get the one with the rainbow pieces?" Emma asked, her hazel eyes sparkling with innocent hope. Sarah felt her chest tighten. She glanced down at the crumpled bills in her hand. $11.37. It was all she had left until her next paycheck in 4 days. Her part-time job at the local diner barely covered rent, and this month had been particularly brutal. The car had needed an emergency repair, and Emma's prescription for her asthma inhaler had cost more than Sarah had budgeted for. "Not today, sweetheart. We need to get the important stuff first, okay?" Sarah replied, forcing brightness into her voice that she didn't feel. Emma's face fell, but she nodded quietly. At 5 years old, she was already learning what it meant to go without. That realization broke Sarah's heart more than any empty pantry ever could. Sarah reached for the store-brand milk, the cheapest option at $2.49. She needed 2 gallons to last them through the week. As she did the mental math, calculating what else she could afford, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out and felt her stomach drop. The screen displayed a text from her landlord. "Sarah, rent is 3 days late. Need payment by tomorrow or we'll have to discuss other arrangements." Her hands began to tremble. She had thought she had until the weekend. The late fee would be $50. $50 she absolutely did not have. Between groceries and the gas she needed to get to work, she was already stretching every penny beyond its limit. Emma wandered a few feet away, examining a display of Valentine's Day cards. Sarah watched her daughter trace her small finger over a glittery heart, probably thinking about the cards they'd need for her kindergarten class party next week. Another expense Sarah hadn't accounted for. The weight of it all pressed down on Sarah's shoulders like a physical force. She was 28 years old, and most days she felt 50. Her ex-husband Marcus had left 2 years ago, shortly after Emma was diagnosed with asthma. He'd said he couldn't handle the responsibility, couldn't deal with the medical bills and the constant worry. The divorce had been quick, and his child support payments had been even quicker to stop coming. Her lawyer said pursuing him would cost more than she'd ever collect. Sarah blinked hard, refusing to let the tears come. Not here. Not in the middle of the grocery store where neighbors might see. Cedar Falls was a small town, and gossip traveled faster than the wind across the Iowa cornfields. She placed 1 gallon of milk in her cart, then reached for the second. Her fingers froze on the plastic handle as she recalculated. If she bought both gallons, she'd only have $6.39 left. That wouldn't cover the bread, eggs, and peanut butter she desperately needed. Emma had eaten peanut butter sandwiches for dinner 3 times this week already. A decision formed in her mind, one that made her feel like the worst mother in the world. She could buy 1 gallon of milk and stretch it by mixing it with water. Emma was too young to notice the difference. It would taste a little off, but it would last longer. She could use the extra money for the other essentials. Sarah pulled her hand back from the 2nd gallon, leaving it on the shelf. She took a deep breath and started pushing her cart toward the bread aisle, Emma skipping along beside her, humming a tune from her favorite cartoon. As they rounded the corner, Sarah nearly collided with another shopper. She looked up to apologize and found herself face to face with Margaret Henderson, one of the other mothers from Emma's school. Margaret's cart was overflowing with name-brand items, fresh vegetables, and what looked like ingredients for an elaborate dinner party. "Oh, Sarah." "Hi," Margaret said, her smile perfectly polite but her eyes already scanning Sarah's nearly empty cart. "How are you?" "How's Emma?" "We're good, thanks. Just doing a quick shop," Sarah replied, instinctively positioning her body to block Margaret's view of her sparse groceries. "Well, we're having a little get-together this Saturday for the kindergarten families. You should come. It's at our place." "Very casual," Margaret said, though everything about her screamed anything but casual, from her designer yoga pants to her freshly highlighted hair. "That sounds lovely. We'll have to see," Sarah said, knowing full well she couldn't afford to bring a dish to share, let alone take time off from her Saturday shift at the diner. "Great. Well, I better run. See you at pickup," Margaret wheeled her cart away, and Sarah caught the subtle glance Margaret gave to Sarah's worn coat and scuffed shoes. Emma tugged at her hand again. "Mommy, my tummy is making noises, I know, baby. We'll get home soon and have lunch," Sarah promised, even though lunch would probably be the last of the mac and cheese box from 2 nights ago. They made their way through the store, Sarah carefully selecting only the absolute necessities: a loaf of store-brand white bread, a dozen eggs, a jar of peanut butter, a small bag of rice, some frozen vegetables that were on clearance because the packaging was slightly torn. When they reached the checkout line, Sarah's anxiety spiked. She placed each item on the conveyor belt with trembling hands, watching the digital display climb higher and higher. The elderly cashier, Betty, had worked at this Save Mart for as long as Sarah could remember. Her kind eyes crinkled with recognition. "Hi, Sarah, honey. How are you holding up?" Betty asked gently. "Doing okay, Mrs. Betty. You know how it is," Sarah replied with a weak smile. Betty began scanning items, and Sarah watched the total with growing dread. $11.12. She had 25 cents to spare. But then Betty scanned the milk and the display jumped to $13.61. Sarah's heart stopped. "Wait, I thought that milk was $2.49. Betty checked the carton and shook her head apologetically. "That's the half-gallon price, sweetie. The gallon is $4.49. They moved the signs around yesterday." I'm sorry, the words hit Sarah like a punch to the gut. She had miscalculated. She didn't have enough money. "I need to put something back," Sarah whispered, her voice cracking. The line behind her was growing. She could feel the impatient stares, hear the subtle sighs. Emma looked up at her with confused eyes. "Mommy, what's wrong?" "Nothing, baby. Mommy just made a mistake with the numbers," Sarah said, reaching for the milk. "I'll put this back." But Betty was already shaking her head. "Honey, your little one needs milk. Let's see what else we can do." Sarah felt the tears building behind her eyes. The humiliation was overwhelming. She was a grown woman who couldn't afford a gallon of milk for her daughter. What kind of mother was she? That's when her composure finally shattered. The tears came hot and fast, spilling down her cheeks before she could stop them. She tried to wipe them away quickly, but it was too late. The dam had broken. "I'm sorry," she whispered to Betty, to the people in line behind her, to Emma, to herself. "I'm so sorry. I just can't afford it. I thought I had enough, but I don't. I don't have enough for milk." The silence that followed Sarah's breakdown was deafening. Emma wrapped her small arms around her mother's leg, sensing something was terribly wrong but not quite understanding what. The other shoppers in line shifted uncomfortably, some averting their eyes, others whispering to each other behind cupped hands. Betty reached across the counter and gently touched Sarah's hand. "Oh, sweetheart, it's going to be okay. Let me see what I can do here." But Sarah was already gathering the items, her hands shaking so badly she nearly dropped the eggs. "No, it's fine. I'll just take what I can afford. We'll be okay without the milk for a few days." The woman directly behind Sarah in line, dressed in an expensive pea coat and holding a designer purse, made an exaggerated huffing sound. "Some of us have places to be," she muttered, loud enough for everyone to hear. Sarah's face burned with shame. She fumbled with the groceries, trying to decide what to put back besides the milk. Maybe the peanut butter. They could make do with just eggs and rice for a while. Emma could have water instead of milk with her meals. People raised children on less, didn't they? "Ma'am, I'll be quick. I'm so sorry for holding up the line," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. Emma started crying too, not understanding what was happening but feeding off her mother's distress. "Mommy, why are you sad?" "Don't be sad." The woman in the pea coat rolled her eyes dramatically and pulled out her phone, typing furiously. Sarah could only imagine what she was posting on social media, probably something about irresponsible people who shouldn't have children if they can't afford them. Sarah had heard variations of that judgment before, usually whispered behind her back at school functions or the town's annual 4th of July barbecue. Betty was trying to help, recalculating the items, but the math remained unchanged. Sarah didn't have enough money, and no amount of kindness from a cashier could change that fundamental, humiliating fact. Just then, a deep voice came from behind the impatient woman. "Excuse me, miss. Mind if I cut through?" Sarah glanced up through her tears and saw 3 men moving past the other shoppers. They were impossible to miss. All 3 wore black leather jackets adorned with patches, heavy boots, and had the weathered, road-worn look of men who spent more time on motorcycles than in grocery stores. The tallest one, a broad-shouldered man with a graying beard and kind blue eyes, stepped forward. His jacket had a patch that read Road Warriors MC Cedar Falls Chapter. The woman in the peacoat gasped and quickly stepped back, clutching her purse tighter. The other shoppers made room, and Sarah felt a spike of fear. She had heard stories about motorcycle clubs, and none of them ended well for single mothers crying in grocery stores. The tall man stopped beside Sarah's cart and looked down at Emma, who had stopped crying and was staring up at him with wide eyes. Then he turned to Betty. "Ma'am, I couldn't help but overhear. How much is she short?" Betty glanced at Sarah, silently asking permission. Sarah was too stunned to speak, so she just nodded numbly. "About $2.24, Betty replied. The man pulled out his wallet without hesitation. "I'll cover it. Ring up everything she's got." Sarah found her voice, shaking her head vigorously. "No, I can't accept that. Thank you, but I can't take your money. We'll be fine." The man smiled, and it transformed his intimidating appearance into something surprisingly gentle. "Ma'am, with all due respect, my mama raised me better than to let a little girl go without milk. Consider it a neighbor helping a neighbor. No strings attached." One of his companions, a shorter man with a shaved head and a spiderweb tattoo on his neck, leaned down to Emma's level. "Hey there, little lady. What's your name?" "Emma," she whispered, still holding tight to Sarah's leg. "That's a real pretty name. You know what, Emma? My daughter's name is Emily. She's about your age, too," the man said warmly. The third biker, younger with long hair tied back in a ponytail, added his own wallet to the counter. "Matter of fact, let's make sure she's got enough for next time, too. Ring up another $50 worth of whatever she needs." Sarah's tears came harder now, but they were different. Confusion mixed with gratitude, mixed with overwhelming emotion. "I don't understand. Why are you doing this?" The tall man met her eyes steadily. "Because 10 years ago I was you. Divorced, broke, couldn't feed my kids without help from the church food bank. Someone helped me when I had nothing. Now I've got something, so I'm passing it forward. That's what we do." Betty was already ringing up additional items, including the second gallon of milk Sarah had left on the shelf. The bikers paid without another word, counting out bills and change until the total was covered with money to spare. Sarah tried to refuse again, but the tall man held up a hand. "Please don't take this away from us. Doing something good feels better than any ride on a Sunday morning. You'd be doing us a favor by accepting." Emma tugged on the tall man's jacket. "Thank you, mister. You're nice." His expression softened even further. "You're welcome, sweetheart. You take care of your mama, okay? She looks like she works real hard for you." As Betty bagged the groceries, other shoppers in line had grown quiet. The woman in the peacoat had disappeared entirely, apparently unwilling to stick around once the bikers arrived. But an elderly gentleman 2 spots back stepped forward. "I'd like to add $20 if that's all right." "For the little girl," he said, pulling out a crisp bill. Another woman, younger with 2 toddlers in her cart, pulled out a 10. "Me too. I've been where she is. It's not easy." Within moments, strangers were stepping forward with crumpled bills and handfuls of change. A teenage boy working as a bag boy emptied his tips from his pocket. A middle-aged woman handed over a grocery store gift card she'd received for Christmas but never used. Betty had tears streaming down her own face as she accepted each contribution. The tall biker organized it all, collecting the money and handing it to Sarah, who was now crying so hard she could barely breathe. In total, the strangers had given her nearly $200. "I don't know what to say," Sarah gasped between sobs. "I've never had anyone do anything like this for me. Thank you doesn't feel like enough." The biker placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Then don't say anything. Just remember this feeling the next time you see someone struggling. When you're back on your feet, and you will be, pass it forward to someone else. That's all the thanks we need." Betty finished loading the bags into Sarah's cart, including items Sarah hadn't even selected: fresh fruit, a rotisserie chicken, a box of that colorful cereal Emma had wanted. The cart was fuller than it had been in months. The shorter biker handed Sarah a business card. "That's got the number for our club's community outreach program. We help families in tough spots. Food assistance, job connections. Sometimes we can help with rent if it's an emergency. Don't be too proud to call." Sarah clutched the card like a lifeline. Her voice was hoarse from crying. "How can I ever repay this?" The young biker with the ponytail grinned. "Easy. Keep being a good mom. That kid of yours is lucky to have someone who cares as much as you do." Most folks would have given up by now. You didn't. That's worth respecting. As Sarah pushed her now overflowing cart toward the exit, Emma, riding in the front seat with a huge smile on her face and clutching a small teddy bear one of the shoppers had added to the pile, she turned back one more time. The three bikers were still standing there, watching them leave with satisfied expressions. The tall one gave her a small salute. "Take care of yourself, ma'am. You're stronger than you think." Sarah nodded, unable to form words. As she loaded the groceries into her beat-up Honda Civic, her phone buzzed again. Another text from the landlord. But somehow, with the weight of kindness still fresh on her shoulders and the impossible generosity of strangers filling her car, the text didn't seem quite as terrifying anymore. Emma chattered happily in her car seat. "Mommy, those motorcycle men were like superheroes. Did you see their cool jackets? And that one man had a really big beard like Santa Claus." Sarah smiled through her tears, starting the car. "Yeah, baby. They were like superheroes. Real-life superheroes." What she didn't know yet was that the tall biker, whose name was James Cortland, had already pulled out his phone and made a call to the other members of the Road Warriors Motorcycle Club. By that evening, Sarah's story would be shared across their social media pages, and a fundraising campaign would be launched that would change everything. Sarah barely slept that night. After putting Emma to bed with a full stomach for the first time in weeks, the rotisserie chicken had made a feast with the fresh vegetables and rice. She sat at her small kitchen table counting and recounting the money. $193 in cash, plus a $50 gift card to Save Mart. It felt like a fortune. It felt like a miracle. She paid her landlord the next morning, apologizing profusely for the delay and handing over the rent plus the late fee. Mr. Peterson, a gruff man in his 60s who rarely showed emotion, had looked at her with something almost resembling concern. "You doing okay, Sarah? You look tired. Just working a lot," she'd replied, which was true enough. Between her shifts at Rosie's Diner and picking up occasional house-cleaning jobs on her days off, she was running herself into the ground. But what choice did she have? That Friday afternoon, Sarah's phone rang while she was wiping down tables at the diner. It was an unknown number with a Cedar Falls area code. Normally she wouldn't answer, worried it might be a debt collector, but something made her pick up. "Hello? Hi, is this Sarah Mitchell?" The voice was female, professional, and kind. "Yes, this is she. My name is Rebecca Torres. I'm a reporter with the Cedar Falls Gazette. I was hoping I could talk to you about what happened at Save Mart earlier this week." Sarah's stomach dropped. Oh God, someone had called the newspaper. Now everyone in town would know how she'd broken down crying in the grocery store because she couldn't afford milk. The humiliation would be unbearable. "I really don't want to talk about it." "I'm sorry," Sarah said quickly, ready to hang up. "Wait, please. I promise this isn't what you think. James Cortland from the Road Warriors reached out to us. He wanted to share your story with your permission because what happened was beautiful, the community coming together like that. But more importantly, there's something else I need to tell you." Sarah hesitated, her hand gripping the phone tighter. "What do you mean?" Rebecca took a breath. After James posted about what happened on the Road Warriors Facebook page, it went viral. Completely viral. It's been shared over 50,000 times in the last 3 days. People from all over Iowa, all over the country actually, have been reaching out wanting to help you. There's a GoFundMe campaign that's already raised over $18,000. The phone nearly slipped from Sarah's hand. She grabbed the edge of the table to steady herself. "What? That's not possible. It's very possible. And it's real. James and his club have been managing it, making sure everything is legitimate. They want to give you the money, but they needed to reach you first to make sure you're comfortable with it. The story is already out there, but they wanted your consent before releasing your full name or any identifying details." Sarah couldn't breathe. $18,000. That was more money than she'd seen in years. That was enough to pay rent for months. That was enough to fix her car properly, to replace Emma's outgrown winter coat, to actually take her to the doctor for regular checkups instead of waiting until she was sick. "I don't understand why people would do this for me. I'm nobody special." Rebecca's voice was gentle. "Sometimes stories touch people in ways we don't expect. A single mom struggling to feed her child, kind strangers stepping in to help, it resonates. It reminds people that there's still goodness in the world. And honestly, I think a lot of people see themselves in your situation, or they remember when they were there." Tears were streaming down Sarah's face again. But this time, they were different. These weren't tears of shame or desperation. These were tears of disbelief, of hope, of something she'd almost forgotten how to feel. "Can I meet with you and James?" Sarah asked. "I need to thank him properly. I need to thank everyone." They arranged to meet the next day at the Road Warriors Clubhouse, a modest building on the outskirts of town that Sarah had driven past 100 times but never really noticed. When she arrived Saturday morning with Emma in tow, she was shocked to find news cameras and a small crowd gathered outside. James Cortland greeted her with the same gentle smile from the grocery store. He knelt down to shake Emma's hand first, making her giggle before standing to face Sarah. "I hope this isn't too overwhelming. The story got bigger than any of us expected," he said. "Overwhelming doesn't even begin to cover it," Sarah replied. "But I'm grateful. So incredibly grateful." Inside the clubhouse, the other members of the Road Warriors were present, along with Rebecca Torres and a camera crew from a local news station. Someone had set up a table with coffee and donuts, and Emma immediately gravitated toward a box of chocolate-glazed ones. James pulled up a laptop and showed Sarah the GoFundMe page. The total had climbed to $22,000 since Rebecca's phone call the day before. The comments section was filled with messages from strangers offering encouragement, sharing their own stories of hardship, and praising the bikers who had started the chain of kindness. Sarah read through the comments with shaking hands. One woman wrote, "I was a single mom once too. I know that feeling of standing in the store doing math in your head, sending love and support." Another said, "The Road Warriors restored my faith in humanity. This is what community is supposed to look like." "If you're watching this story unfold and feeling moved by it," James said, speaking to the camera that had started rolling, "I want to encourage you to look around your own community. There's probably a Sarah in your neighborhood. Someone struggling silently, too proud or too scared to ask for help. Sometimes all it takes is paying attention. Sometimes all it takes is caring enough to act." He turned back to Sarah. "The money is yours, no strings attached. But we also want to offer you something else. Our club partners with several local businesses. One of our members owns an accounting firm downtown, and they're looking for someone to train as a receptionist. Full-time benefits included. If you're interested, the job is yours." Sarah felt her knees weaken. She sat down hard in a nearby chair. A real job. With benefits. That meant health insurance for Emma. That meant stability. Yes, I'm interested. "I'm very interested," she managed to say. Rebecca stepped forward with her notepad. "Sarah, I know this is a lot to process, but can I ask you a few questions for the article?" "About how this has impacted you? About what you want people to know?" Sarah nodded, wiping her eyes. She thought about all the nights she'd cried herself to sleep, wondering how she'd make it through. She thought about the shame she'd felt standing in that grocery store line. She thought about Emma, who deserved so much more than what Sarah had been able to give her. "I want people to know that asking for help isn't weakness. I was so afraid of being judged, so afraid of being seen as a failure, that I was willing to let my daughter go without rather than admit I was struggling. But the truth is, we all struggle. Every single one of us has moments where we can't do it alone, and that's okay." She looked at James and the other bikers, these men who society often judged by their appearance, who had shown more compassion than people in suits and ties had ever offered her. "I also want people to know that kindness can come from the most unexpected places." I was terrified when these men walked up to me in that store. But they saw me, really saw me, not as a charity case or a statistic, but as a person worth helping. That changed something in me. "If you're watching this and Sarah's story has touched your heart," Rebecca said, addressing the camera, "take a moment right now to subscribe to our channel. We'll be following Sarah's journey and sharing more stories of community kindness. Sometimes we all need a reminder that good people still exist, that hope is still alive." The interview continued for another 20 minutes. Sarah answered questions about her background, about Emma, about her dreams for the future that had seemed impossible just days ago. Emma played with the children of some of the other club members, her laughter ringing through the clubhouse like music. When the cameras finally turned off and the reporters began packing up their equipment, Sarah felt exhausted but lighter than she had in years. James walked her out to her car, carrying the box of donuts Emma had been eyeing. "One more thing," he said, reaching into his jacket pocket. He pulled out an envelope. "This is from the club members personally. It's not part of the GoFundMe. Consider it a welcome to the family gift." Sarah opened the envelope and found $500 in cash along with a handwritten note that simply said, "For Emma's birthday party." Every kid deserves to celebrate. She couldn't stop the fresh wave of tears. Emma's birthday was next month and Sarah had been dreading it, knowing she couldn't afford even a simple cake. "You didn't have to do this. We wanted to," James replied simply. "And Sarah, one more thing. You're not alone anymore. You've got a whole community behind you now. Don't forget that." The following Monday, Sarah walked into Henderson and Associates Accounting with Emma's hand clutched tightly in hers. The office was located on Main Street, in one of the restored historic buildings that gave Cedar Falls its charm. Through the large windows, she could see the town square where the farmers' market set up every Saturday morning. A woman in her 50s with warm brown eyes and silver-streaked hair greeted them at the front desk. "You must be Sarah. I'm Linda Henderson. Welcome." Sarah shook her hand nervously. "Thank you so much for this opportunity, Mrs. Henderson. I promise I'll work hard." Linda smiled. "Please call me Linda, and I have no doubts about your work ethic. James told me about you. Besides, anyone who can manage single parenthood while working multiple jobs already knows more about organization and multitasking than half the people I've interviewed with fancy degrees." She knelt down to Emma's level. "And who is this beautiful young lady?" "I'm Emma. I'm 5 3/4, Emma announced proudly. "Well, Emma, we have a small break room in the back with some books and coloring supplies. Your mom is going to be here for a few hours learning the ropes. Think you can keep yourself entertained?" Emma nodded enthusiastically, and Linda led them through the office. It was smaller than Sarah had expected, but professionally decorated with comfortable furniture and plants in every corner. 2 other employees waved hello from their desks, and Sarah felt a wave of relief at their friendly expressions. The first week was overwhelming. Sarah had to learn the phone system, the filing procedures, how to manage the appointment calendar, and basic bookkeeping software. But Linda was patient and the other staff members went out of their way to help. For the first time in years, Sarah felt like she was building something real, something that could last. The GoFundMe money had been transferred to a new bank account James helped her set up. $24,000 in total by the time the campaign closed. Sarah sat at her kitchen table one evening, calculator in hand, making a plan. First, 3 months of rent paid in advance. Second, a proper savings account for emergencies. Third, a small used car to replace the Honda that was barely holding together. Fourth, new clothes for Emma and herself so they didn't look quite so threadbare. Fifth, she'd put aside money for Emma's education. But the most important thing the money bought was time. Time to breathe. Time to sleep properly. Time to be present with Emma instead of constantly stressed about survival. Emma's 6th birthday party was held at the Road Warriors Clubhouse, which the members had transformed into a Princess Wonderland at Sarah's request. Pink streamers hung from the ceiling, a unicorn cake sat on the main table, and 20 children from Emma's kindergarten class ran around playing games organized by the bikers, who had enthusiastically embraced their roles as party helpers. Margaret Henderson showed up with her daughter, and Sarah watched the woman's expression shift from skepticism to genuine warmth as she observed the celebration. The same woman who had looked down on Sarah's empty grocery cart now approached with an apologetic smile. "Sarah, I owe you an apology. I heard about what happened at the store, and I'm ashamed to say I was one of the people in line that day. I didn't help. I just stood there judging. I'm sorry." Sarah was taken aback by the confession. She could have been bitter, could have thrown the apology back in Margaret's face. But what would that accomplish? "Thank you for saying that. It takes courage to admit when we've been unkind," Sarah replied. Margaret's eyes glistened with tears. "My husband lost his job last month. We've been living off savings and it's running out fast. I kept thinking we were different from people who struggle, that it couldn't happen to us. Your story made me realize how easily any of us could end up in that grocery line, counting pennies and making impossible choices." The 2 women talked for over an hour, and by the end, Margaret had become an unexpected ally. She connected Sarah with other mothers in the community who were forming a support network for families facing financial hardship. What started as one woman's breakdown in a grocery store had sparked a movement of compassion throughout Cedar Falls. 3 months into her new job, Linda called Sarah into her office. Sarah's heart raced, immediately fearing she'd done something wrong, but Linda's expression was pleased. Sarah, I've been watching you these past few months. You're efficient, professional, and the clients love you. I'd like to offer you a raise and a promotion. How would you feel about training to become a bookkeeper? It would mean more responsibility and better pay, and I think you have the aptitude for it. Sarah felt tears spring to her eyes yet again. She seemed to cry more now than she had during the hardest times, but these were tears of joy, of disbelief that her life had turned around so dramatically. I would love that. Thank you, Linda. You have no idea what this means to me. Linda waved away the thanks. You've earned it. Now there's something else I wanted to discuss with you. She pulled out a newspaper clipping. It was Rebecca Torres's article about Sarah's story, which had been picked up by several major news outlets. The headline read, "When a single mom couldn't afford milk, a biker gang changed everything. You've become somewhat famous around here. People are inspired by your story. James called me yesterday with an idea, and I wanted to run it by you first. The Road Warriors want to establish a foundation, a non-profit specifically designed to help families in crisis. They want to call it Emma's Fund, and they want you to be part of the leadership team." Sarah sat back in her chair, stunned. Me? I don't know anything about running a nonprofit. You know what it's like to need help. You know how to talk to people who are struggling because you've been there. That's more valuable than any business degree, Linda assured her. Think about it. You don't have to decide today, but Sarah didn't need time to think. She knew exactly what her answer would be. Yes. Absolutely yes. Over the next 2 months, Emma's Fund took shape. The Road Warriors donated the initial funding, and community members stepped up to volunteer. They established a hotline for families in crisis, set up partnerships with local grocery stores for food assistance, and created a job training program for people trying to get back on their feet. The first family Emma's Fund helped was a young couple whose house had burned down, leaving them homeless with 3 small children. Sarah met them at the clubhouse, and the moment she saw the fear and exhaustion in the mother's eyes, she recognized her own reflection from months earlier. I know how scared you are right now. I know it feels like you'll never get through this. But you will. We're going to help you, Sarah said, taking the woman's hands in hers. They provided temporary housing, clothes, food, and connected the father with a construction job through one of the club members. 6 weeks later, the family was back in an apartment, stable and recovering. The local news did a follow-up story on Emma's Fund, and Sarah found herself once again in front of cameras. But this time she wasn't the broken woman crying over milk. She was strong, purposeful, and determined to make sure no one else had to feel as alone as she once did. James pulled her aside after the interview. You know what I see when I look at you now? Not that scared woman from the grocery store. I see a leader. Someone who took the worst moment of her life and turned it into something that's changing this entire community. Sarah smiled, thinking about how far she'd come. I couldn't have done any of this without you. Without all of you, sure you could have. We just gave you a hand up when you needed it. Everything else, all this transformation, that's all you, Sarah. That evening, as Sarah tucked Emma into bed in their new apartment, a 2-bedroom place with actual heat and windows that didn't leak, her daughter looked up at her with serious eyes. Mommy, remember when you were sat at the store and the motorcycle superheroes helped us? Sarah nodded, brushing Emma's hair back from her forehead. I remember, sweetheart. I'm glad they helped us, because now you're happy, and you help other people be happy too. That's what superheroes do. Sarah kissed her daughter's forehead, her heart so full it felt like it might burst. You're right, baby. That's exactly what superheroes do. As she turned off Emma's bedroom light and walked back to the small kitchen table where she'd been reviewing applications for Emma's Fund, Sarah thought about the woman she'd been 6 months ago. That woman had been convinced she was failing, convinced she had nothing to offer the world except her ability to survive one more day. But that woman had been wrong. She'd had strength she didn't know about. She'd had resilience that could weather any storm. And most importantly, she discovered that accepting help wasn't weakness. It was the first step toward becoming strong enough to help others. Her phone buzzed with a text from James. Big news. Check your email. Sarah opened her laptop and found a message from a national nonprofit organization. They'd seen the stories about Emma's Fund and wanted to partner with the Road Warriors to create similar programs in other communities across the country. They were offering funding, resources, and a platform to expand the mission. Sarah read the email 3 times, barely believing the words. What had started with 3 bikers paying for groceries was becoming a nationwide movement of compassion. The conference room at Henderson and Associates had been transformed into a makeshift headquarters for Emma's fund. Maps covered the walls showing potential expansion cities, and whiteboards were filled with budgets, timelines, and action items. Sarah stood at the head of the table, flanked by James and 3 representatives from Hope United, the national nonprofit that wanted to partner with them. The lead representative, a sharp-eyed woman named Diane Carter, clicked through a presentation on her laptop. Based on our research, we believe the Emma's Fund model could be replicated in at least 50 cities within the first year. Your approach is unique because it combines immediate crisis intervention with long-term support and community building. James leaned back in his chair, his arms crossed thoughtfully. We want to make sure we don't lose what makes this special. It's not just about handing out money. It's about dignity. It's about seeing people as human beings, not case numbers. Diane nodded emphatically. That's exactly why we want to work with you. Too many assistance programs are bureaucratic nightmares that humiliate the very people they're supposed to help. Your model, this direct person-to-person connection, it changes everything. Sarah added, when I was standing in that grocery store, what broke me wasn't just the lack of money. It was feeling invisible, feeling like I didn't matter. What James and his club did was see me. Really see me. That's what we need to preserve as we grow. Over the next hour, they hammered out the details of the partnership. Hope United would provide grants, training resources, and connections to corporate sponsors. Emma's Fund would maintain operational control and ensure that every new chapter stayed true to the original mission. Local motorcycle clubs in other cities had already expressed interest in replicating the Road Warriors model. Sarah's phone rang as the meeting was wrapping up. It was Emma's school. Her heart jumped immediately to worst-case scenarios, but the voice on the other end was cheerful. Ms. Mitchell? This is Principal Anderson. Nothing's wrong, but I wanted to let you know that Emma's teacher has nominated her for the Student Kindness Award this semester. Apparently, she's been sharing her lunch with a classmate whose family is having trouble, and she told her teacher she learned from you that helping people is what superheroes do. Sarah felt her throat tighten with emotion. That's my girl. Thank you for calling. After hanging up, she shared the news with the room. James laughed, shaking his head. That kid is going to change the world someday. She's already started. The partnership with Hope United officially launched in December, 8 months after that life-changing day at Save Mart. The kickoff event was held at the Cedar Falls Community Center, and over 300 people attended. Local news crews were there, along with reporters from Des Moines and even a team from a national morning show that had been following Sarah's story. Sarah stood backstage, smoothing down the navy dress she'd bought for the occasion. It was the nicest piece of clothing she'd ever owned. Linda had helped her pick it out, insisting that Sarah looked like the leader she'd become. Nervous? James appeared beside her, looking uncomfortable in a button-down shirt and tie instead of his usual leather and denim. Terrified, Sarah admitted. What if I mess up the speech? What if people realize I have no idea what I'm doing? James put a reassuring hand on her shoulder. You know exactly what you're doing because you've lived it. That's more qualification than any expert with a PhD could ever have. Just speak from your heart like you always do. When Sarah walked onto the stage, the applause was thunderous. She looked out at the crowd and saw faces she recognized. Betty from the grocery store, Linda and her staff, Margaret Henderson and the other school moms, the members of the Road Warriors with their families, and dozens of people whose lives Emma's Fund had already touched. Emma sat in the front row, wearing a pretty purple dress and swinging her legs excitedly. Beside her sat a social worker who had become a friend to Sarah over the past months, someone who had connected them with additional resources and support services. Sarah approached the microphone, her prepared speech cards trembling in her hands, but as she looked out at all those expectant faces, she set the cards aside. 9 months ago, I was standing in a grocery store crying because I couldn't afford a gallon of milk for my daughter. I was exhausted, broken, and convinced I was failing as a mother. I had worked 2 jobs, sacrificed everything, and it still wasn't enough. In that moment, I felt completely alone in the world. The room was silent except for the occasional camera shutter click. Then 3 men in leather jackets walked up to me. I'll be honest, I was scared. I had no idea what to expect. But what happened next changed my life forever. These men, She gestured to James, and his club members didn't see a failure. They didn't see a charity case. They saw a neighbor who needed help, and they stepped up without hesitation. They started a chain reaction of kindness that has led us all to this moment right here. Sarah's voice grew stronger as she continued. Emma's Fund isn't just about money. It's about restoring dignity to people in crisis. It's about building a community where asking for help isn't shameful. Where struggling doesn't mean you're weak. Where one bad month or one unexpected expense doesn't define your entire worth as a human being. She looked directly at the cameras. If you're watching this and you're struggling right now, I want you to hear me. You are not alone. You are not a failure. Sometimes life is just hard, and the systems that are supposed to catch us when we fall have holes in them. That's not your fault. But there are people who care. There are people who want to help. Please don't suffer in silence like I did. The applause when she finished was deafening. People stood, many wiping tears from their eyes. Emma ran up onto the stage and hugged her mother's legs, and Sarah lifted her daughter into her arms. Holding her tight, Diane Carter took the microphone next, announcing that corporate sponsors had committed over $500,000 to the expansion effort. 5 cities had already been selected for the first Emma's Fund chapters: Detroit, Phoenix, Atlanta, Portland, and Louisville. Motorcycle clubs in each location had volunteered to anchor the programs. But the most emotional moment came when Betty, the cashier from Save Mart, was called to the stage. The elderly woman shuffled up slowly, looking bewildered. Betty has worked at Save Mart for 37 years, Sarah explained to the crowd. She's helped countless customers with patience and kindness. On the worst day of my life, she treated me with such gentleness when she could have made me feel even smaller. Betty, Emma's Fund wants to honor you with our first Community Compassion Award and a gift of $5,000 as thanks for a lifetime of service to this town. Betty burst into tears, covering her face with her hands. Sarah hugged her while the crowd erupted in applause. When Betty finally composed herself enough to speak, her voice was shaky but clear. I've worked that checkout line for nearly 4 decades. I've seen people at their best and their worst. I've seen folks with overflowing carts look down on folks counting pennies. But I've also seen miracles. I've seen strangers help strangers. I've seen this community pull together when it matters. What happened with Sarah wasn't just 3 bikers being kind. It was all of us remembering what we're supposed to be to each other. After the formal program ended, the event turned into a celebration. Food was provided by local restaurants, including Rosie's Diner, where Sarah had once worked. Her former manager, Rosie herself, pulled Sarah aside with tears in her eyes. I knew you were special from the day I hired you. You never complained, never made excuses, just worked harder than anyone I'd ever seen. I'm so proud of what you've become. Sarah hugged the woman who had given her a chance when she desperately needed income. Thank you for believing in me when I didn't believe in myself. As the evening wore on, Sarah found herself surrounded by people sharing their own stories. A man who had lost his job and his home but was back on his feet thanks to Emma's Fund. A woman whose medical bills had bankrupted her family until the program helped negotiate with the hospital and set up a payment plan. A teenager whose single father had died unexpectedly, leaving her alone until the community rallied around her. Each story reminded Sarah why this work mattered. Each person represented someone who might have fallen through the cracks without intervention. Each life touched was a ripple extending outward into the world. James found her near the end of the night holding a sleeping Emma in her arms. The little girl had worn herself out with excitement. You did good today, he said quietly. Real good. We did good, Sarah corrected. None of this happens without you, he smiled. Remember what I told you that first day? About paying it forward? You've taken that further than I ever imagined. You've built something that's going to outlive all of us. Sarah looked around the community center at all the people still talking, still connecting, still building relationships that would sustain them through future hardships. This was what community was supposed to look like. This was what humanity was capable of when people chose compassion over judgment. Her phone buzzed with a message from Rebecca Torres, the reporter who had first shared her story. Congratulations on tonight. Your story just got picked up by Good Morning America. They want you on the show next week. Sarah showed James the message and they both laughed in disbelief. From crying in a grocery store to national television in less than a year, it seemed impossible. Yet here she was. As she carried Emma out to their car, a reliable used Toyota she'd purchased with part of the GoFundMe money, Sarah paused to look up at the stars. The November air was crisp and cold, reminding her of that day in February when everything had fallen apart and somehow come together at the same time. "Thank you," she whispered to the universe, to the strangers who had helped her, to the second chances she'd been given. Emma stirred in her arms. "Love you, Mommy. You're the best superhero." Sarah kissed her daughter's forehead. "Love you too, baby, always." 2 years later, Sarah stood in the arrival terminal of Chicago O'Hare International Airport, holding a sign that read "Welcome Home" in bright purple letters, Emma's favorite color. Around her, travelers rushed past with rolling suitcases and tired expressions. But Sarah felt nothing but anticipation. The automatic doors slid open, and a young woman emerged, pushing a cart loaded with luggage. She was thin, with dark circles under her eyes and clothes that had seen better days. A toddler boy sat atop the suitcases, thumb in his mouth, watching the world with wary eyes. Sarah stepped forward with a warm smile. "Maria?" The young woman nodded hesitantly, her grip tightening on the cart handle. "Yes. Are you Sarah Mitchell?" "I am. Welcome to Chicago. Let me help you with those bags." Maria's eyes filled with tears immediately. "I still can't believe this is real. I keep thinking I'm going to wake up and still be in that shelter in Phoenix." Sarah took control of the cart, gesturing for Maria to follow her toward the parking garage. "It's real. You and little Daniel are going to be just fine. We've got you." This had become Sarah's life now. As the national director of Emma's Fund, she spent her days coordinating programs across 17 cities, training volunteers, securing funding, and occasionally meeting families like Maria's who were being relocated for fresh starts. The organization had helped over 3,000 families in 2 years, providing everything from emergency groceries to job placement to temporary housing. Sarah's own apartment had been upgraded to a modest 3-bedroom townhouse in a safe neighborhood with good schools. Emma was now 7 years old, thriving in 2nd grade and actively involved in her school's community service club. The little girl who had once gone without milk now organized food drives and encouraged her classmates to donate coats each winter, as Sarah drove Maria and Daniel to the transition apartment Emma's Fund had secured for them. She listened to Maria's story. It was painfully familiar. An abusive relationship she'd finally escaped, family who had turned their backs on her, a minimum wage job that couldn't cover childcare and rent simultaneously. Maria had been sleeping in her car with Daniel when a social worker connected her with Emma's Fund's Phoenix chapter. The Road Warriors chapter there had immediately stepped in, just like James's club had done for Sarah. They'd provided temporary shelter, helped Maria file a restraining order against her ex-boyfriend, and identified a job opportunity in Chicago where Maria's sister lived. Emma's Fund had paid for the relocation costs and first month's rent. "Your sister lives about 20 minutes from your new place," Sarah explained as they drove through the city streets. "She's excited to have you close by, and there's a daycare center 2 blocks from your apartment that has a spot for Daniel. The first 3 months are covered by the fund, which should give you time to get established in your new job." Maria stared out the window, watching the Chicago skyline appear in the distance. "I don't know how to thank you. I've spent the last year feeling like the world's worst mother, like I'd ruined my son's life by not being able to provide for him properly." Sarah glanced at her in the rearview mirror. "I know that feeling intimately, but you didn't ruin anything. You survived. You got both of you out of a dangerous situation. That took incredible courage. Now you get the chance to rebuild, and you don't have to do it alone." The apartment was small but clean, furnished with donations from community members. The fridge was stocked with basics, and the pantry had been filled with non-perishables. On the kitchen counter sat a welcome basket with toiletries, cleaning supplies, and a handwritten note from the Chicago Emma's Fund volunteers. Maria broke down completely when she saw it all, sinking onto the donated couch with her face in her hands. Daniel climbed into his mother's lap, patting her cheeks with his small hands. "No cry, Mama, no cry." Sarah sat beside them, putting an arm around Maria's shaking shoulders. "These are good tears. Let them come. You're allowed to feel relief." After Maria had composed herself and started exploring the apartment with Daniel, Sarah's phone rang. It was James calling from Cedar Falls. Hey, just wanted to let you know the Des Moines Register is doing a feature story on Emma's fund for the 2-year anniversary. They want to interview you, me, and some of the families we've helped. You going to be back in Iowa anytime soon? Sarah checked her calendar. I can fly in next Friday. I want to be there for Emma's school play on Thursday anyway. She's playing a sunflower in the spring musical. James chuckled. A sunflower. That sounds about right for that kid. Hey, I've got some other news. Linda Henderson wants to retire next year. And she's asked if you'd be interested in taking over the accounting firm. She thinks you could run it while still managing Emma's fund. Says you're more than qualified now after all the nonprofit management experience. Sarah was speechless for a moment. Linda would trust me with her entire business? She doesn't just trust you. She believes in you. Same way I do. Same way everyone who's watched you grow these past 2 years does. You've earned this, Sarah. After the call ended, Sarah helped Maria unpack and showed her around the neighborhood, pointing out the grocery store, the library, the community center where Emma's fund held weekly support group meetings. By the time she left that evening, Maria and Daniel were settled in, eating donated pizza and watching cartoons on the small television volunteers had provided. Driving back to her townhouse, Sarah reflected on how surreal her life had become. She'd appeared on 3 national television shows, been featured in magazines, and given a TEDx talk about dignity and community support. But none of that compared to moments like today. Seeing the relief and hope in Maria's eyes, knowing that one more family wouldn't have to suffer alone. Emma was at her friend's house for a sleepover, so Sarah had the evening to herself. She poured a glass of wine, something she could actually afford, now on her salary from Emma's fund and her continued part-time work with Linda's firm, and sat on her small balcony watching the sunset. Her phone buzzed with a text from Betty, the Save Mart cashier who had become an unexpected friend. The message included a photo of Betty at the grocery store wearing an Emma's Fund volunteer button on her vest. Caption read, "Still keeping an eye out for folks who need help. Your legacy is everywhere, dear." Sarah smiled, thinking about how one terrible, humiliating moment had transformed into something beautiful and lasting. She'd learned that rock bottom could actually be a foundation if you let the right people help you build on it. The next week, Sarah returned to Cedar Falls for the Des Moines Register interview. The photographer wanted shots at the original Save Mart, specifically in aisle 7 where it had all begun. Sarah stood there with James and Betty, the 3 of them positioned in front of the milk coolers, and couldn't help but laugh at the symbolism. Who knew that dairy products would change so many lives? Betty joked, making everyone crack up. The article ran the following Sunday with the headline, "From Breaking Down to Building Up: How One Mom's Worst Day Sparked a National Movement." It detailed Emma's Fund's growth, included testimonials from dozens of families they'd helped, and featured a sidebar about the Road Warriors' expanding community outreach programs. But Sarah's favorite part was the final quote, which came from Emma herself. "My mom says everyone needs help sometimes, and that's okay. The important thing is that when you get help, you remember to help someone else when you can. That's how you change the world." 3 months later, Sarah officially took over Henderson & Associates, renaming it Henderson Mitchell Accounting to honor Linda's legacy. The firm committed to providing free tax preparation services for all Emma's Fund families. And Sarah hired 2 additional staff members, both single parents who had been through the program and were looking for career opportunities. The anniversary celebration for Emma's Fund was held at the Road Warriors Clubhouse again, but this time it was a much larger affair. Families from all 17 chapters traveled to Cedar Falls for the event. The clubhouse couldn't contain everyone, so they'd rented a large tent in the adjacent field. Sarah stood at the podium looking out at over 500 people. James sat in the front row next to Emma, who was wearing a shirt that said "Future Superhero." Linda was there with her husband. Betty had been given a place of honor on the stage. Margaret Henderson and the other school moms had become some of Emma's Fund's most dedicated volunteers. Even Rosie from the diner had closed early so her entire staff could attend. 2 years ago, I thought my life was over. I thought I had nothing left to give the world except my ability to survive one more day. I was wrong. We're all wrong when we let shame and pride keep us from asking for help. We're wrong when we believe that struggling means failing. She paused, making eye contact with Maria, who had traveled from Chicago with Daniel. The young woman was thriving now, working full-time and taking night classes to become a nurse. This organization isn't about me. It's about all of us. It's about James and the road warriors who chose compassion over judgment. It's about Betty who treated me with kindness when she could have made me feel smaller. It's about every stranger who donated money, time, or resources to help someone they'd never met. It's about every person in this tent who decided that community matters more than individual success. The crowd erupted in applause, and Sarah felt tears streaming down her face, the good kind. The kind that came from overwhelming gratitude. If you followed our journey, if this story has touched your heart, I want to ask you to do something. Don't just watch from the sidelines. Get involved in your own community. Look around and find the people who are struggling silently. Be the person who sees them. Be the person who helps. You don't need money or resources. Sometimes all it takes is paying attention, is caring enough to act. She looked directly at the cameras recording the event for their social media channels. If you're watching this, take a moment to like this video, share it with your friends, comment with your own stories of community kindness. But more importantly, subscribe to our channel so you can follow the journeys of families like Maria's, like mine, like the thousands of others who are finding hope through Emma's Fund. Every view, every share, every subscription helps us reach more people who need to know they're not alone. Emma jumped onto the stage and hugged her mother's legs, and Sarah lifted her into her arms just like she had 2 years ago at the first launch event. I love you, Mommy. You really are a superhero. Sarah kissed her daughter's forehead, her heart so full she thought it might burst. No, baby. We're all superheroes when we choose to help each other. That's the real magic. As the sun set over Cedar Falls and the celebration continued into the evening with food, music, and hundreds of conversations between people who had found family in unexpected places, Sarah thought about that terrified woman who had cried in the grocery store over milk. She'd never forget her. That woman's pain had purpose now. That woman's breaking point had become a breakthrough for thousands. And that woman had learned the most important lesson of all, that asking for help wasn't the end of her story. It was just the beginning.